Well, hello there, vinyl community. It's been a little while since I made a video. It's your friend Matthew Street. I'm here again. Yes, I am, folks. I'm back to make another video for you. And as you can see from the title of it, today's video is the Beatles in the 1980s, or the Beatles in the 80s, whatever I decide to put up on the title. Haven't decided yet. Anyway, the Beatles in the 1980s. And you might be saying, well, Matt, why are you holding up a Meet the Beatles vinyl album if you're going to be talking about the Beatles in the 80s? Well, we have to go back to the beginning a little bit, folks, to talk about this and talk about the Beatles in the 80s and what a seismic shift it was in us in the USA, or I should say we in the USA. Our listening habits, our listening pleasure with the Beatles took a large, huge, massive shift in the 1980s. So before I get to that and show you and tell you why I'm doing this video, basically we have to go back to the beginning. Because back in the early 60s, back in 64 when the Beatles came to America, this is what we had as Americans to listen to. We had albums like Meet the Beatles. We had the Beatles' second album. Again, these were all Capitol Frankenstein versions, or versions that Capitol decided to release. You know the whole story, I won't go into it, how the Beatles had their particular way they wanted the albums released worldwide, and Capitol in the USA and a little bit in Canada as well, and some other countries took liberties in the beginning, in the early stages of the Beatles' career, to play around with the song orders, the covers of the albums, in the case of many of the early American albums. And in some instances in the United States albums, Dave Dexter and his crew played around with the sound. And I won't get into the whole, video is not about that or the history of that, but basically the sound was even played around with in some of the US albums. So we have to go back to this period, because this is what we as Americans had from 1964 all the way up into the 80s. This is what we listened to. This is what was in the stores. We could get it on 8-track, we could get it on cassette, we could get it on vinyl album, but this is what we had, folks, here in the United States, albums such as this. And again, I'm only showing a few of them. I'm going to go up a few more just to show you, get an idea or a flavor of what we were listening to. But as a young boy in the 60s and 70s, this is what I had, folks. This is how I listened to the Beatles. I had nothing else, no other source, unless I wanted to, as I got a little older, spend some hard-earned cash on some imports. But even then, the imports weren't, to me, the standard. They were not the gold standard of listening to the Beatles. I was used to these. These were the albums I grew up on. These were the albums everybody had. And so, yeah, you might get that rare or exclusive import once in a while, but it didn't replace anything for you. You just looked at it as more of an oddity. Like, oh, okay, this album's called Beatles for Sale, and it's a little different song order than on my Beatles 65 or my Beatles 6 album. But we didn't look at it as a replacement. We didn't even look at it as the standard of Beatle releases or the official releases that the Beatles wanted. When I was young, it was, oh, that's just an oddity. That's just something that, they make overseas in England. That's, this is the real, this is the Beatles. This is what I listen to. And that's what our attitude was. That's what our demeanor was about it. These are the albums we loved. These are the albums we grew up on and cherished. And for many, many years, like I said, for well over 20 years, this is what we had. This is what we listened to, and we loved it. Okay, I'll show you one more. Jumping up to 66, this is what we had. This was a standard Beatles album to me growing up, and I loved it. As many of us did, as we all did in the United States, if you're from that era. Okay, so from 1964 right through the 60s, through the regular releases of the Beatles, that's what we got in the United States. And after that, Beatles Yesterday and Today, we got the American version of Revolver, missing 3 John Lennon songs, which was a terrible travesty when you see what Revolver should have been and is. It was a travesty that we were fed that in America with 3 less John Lennon songs. But anyway, Sgt Pepper, Magical Mystery Tour, The White Album, Yellow Submarine, Abbey Road, Let It Be, that's what we got through the 60s into the 70s. And then through the 70s, I thought we got some pretty decent compilations or re-releases of the Beatles material, starting with 67 to 70 and 62 to 66, or as they also are known as the Red and Blue album. those are great releases in the 70s. And I have to tell you folks, even 3 years later when Capitol came out with Rock and Roll Music, the double vinyl version of it with the silver cover and all the different Beatles rock and roll songs on it, I thought that was a pretty darn good release, and I was really excited and to see Got to Get You Into My Life make top 10, number 7 on the top 40 charts in 1976. A year later, I wasn't too displeased with Capitol's version of the Beatles' Love Songs, which was also a great little compilation, I thought. I didn't like it as much as the Rock and Roll Music one. That was kind of a novelty rock and roll music. But I did enjoy Love Songs for what it was. I thought the cover was fantastic. Using the Richard Avedon famous black and white photo of the Beatles was a classy and showed good taste. And so I really enjoyed that release. I also enjoyed the Live at the Star Club release, which came out in 1977. Great little album, I thought. Sound quality had a little left to be desired, but I still thought it was a great release. And I think it came out on Linga Song Records or something. But that led to the excitement of the Beatles at the Hollywood Bowl, which came out in 1977, the first version of it for you older folks like me. And boy, that was exciting time to get that Beatles official live album 7 years after they broke up. Very exciting for us young people back then. Very, very enjoyable listen, and just considered it a fantastic release. Okay, then we move on a few years after that. Now we're getting out of the 70s a little bit. Now we're coming into the 1980s. And this is where things started to go downhill a little bit for me. Anyway, this is at least my opinion. Is like, they threw this at us in the United States. This is Beatles Rarities. It came out, I want to say, early 1980, around March of 1980. It's okay, folks, but it's not the greatest album in the world, in my opinion. When you see what's come out since, I'll try to show you a little bit of it. This is my original version, by the way. But when you look at some of the stuff they put on here and what they tried to pass off as rarities, it's a little left to be desired, and it's very, very questionable and arguable about how many of these things on here are really rarities. So, other than I thought the cover was done very classy and nice with the embossed, raised, almost like Instamatic photo of the Beatles on the front, and I thought the back was very well done. Again, here's some of the song listings if you can see them. Okay, I thought the gatefold was very attractive, very well done. It had a replica of the Butcher cover. It also had some really nice photos of the Beatles over here on the right side of the gatefold. Okay, and you got a very nice inner sleeve with, again, some more great pictures of the Beatles. Okay, and classy move, they put it on the Capitol Rainbow Swirl, which I thought was very nice for the Rarities album. Alright, so that was nice. I mean, I have to say I questioned a little bit, being a super fan at the time. In 1980, I was a late teenager, I think I was 18 or 19. I had heard a lot of the stuff, you know, either through friends or people giving me stuff. A lot of the things on here didn't seem that rare to me. There might have been a couple of nuggets on here. I'm not totally putting it down, folks. I love the packaging. I love the way they use the Rainbow Swirl label. I love the inner sleeve. I like the whole, it was an exciting release at the time to start off the 1980s for the Beatles. But the content, little left to be desired, in my opinion. Any of you have different thoughts, I want to express anything about that, please feel free to comment below here. But yeah, I just didn't feel it was the greatest release. Although, albeit, for what's about to come up here, you'll see that that was my favorite of the three in the early 80s. Okay, so we're in the 80s with the Beatles, okay? And here we go. A couple of years later, Capitol puts this out. This is called the 20 Greatest Hits, the Beatles' 20 Greatest Hits. Folks, this didn't impress me at all at the time. I remember not being happy with it at all. The cover's kind of plainish, okay. The back's very plainish. And as you can see, they just tried to cram on two sides of a record too much material in my opinion, which I felt affected the sound quality. When you try to put that much material, make the grooves so small on a vinyl album to fit material on it, I'm sorry, I just maybe it's me, maybe it's my ears, but I just feel the sound suffered on this thing because they tried to cram too much material on it. So I wasn't happy with the cover. I wasn't happy with they tried to cram so many songs on here, the 20 greatest hits, when only 9 years earlier it was still going strong. You had the Beatles 62 to 66 and 67 to 70, the Red and Blue albums. This was kind of unnecessary, I felt at the time. I remember when it came out, I was like, what are they trying to cash in on something? I mean, they try to, I don't know. Again, maybe I'm wrong, because look what happened in 2000 when they put out the Beatles 1 album, and how it blew up all over the world and became one of the biggest selling albums of the decade. So what do I know? Maybe Capitol thought this would do the same, but I just wasn't happy with it. You got kind of a lame inner sleeve. It's a big collage of Beatle pictures, and it's just about the same thing on the other side. I just didn't think they put a lot of effort into it, Capitol. They put it on the Capitol purple label. The Beatles 20 greatest hits. Didn't impress me. And so here we are 2 years into the 80s, and things are looking kind of bleak, in my opinion anyway, for the Beatles and their releases. Well, then this little gem comes along here. Same year, 1982, the Dregs, in my opinion, folks. This is the Dregs, the bottom of the barrel of Capitol, trying to cash cow. I was going to say something maybe a little more unfriendly. I'll just say no unfriendly. Remember I said in like my first video, the Matthew Street channel will always be clean, will always be good. I'm going to keep that going, okay? So I'm trying here. But this is the Dregs. This is a cash cow, if there ever was a bloated, fat cash cow. In my opinion, folks, Matthew Street says this is it, okay? The Beatles' real music, R-E-E-L, real music. I'm telling you, the cover's horrible, okay? I don't know what, God bless whoever the artist was. I'm sure they were so excited to get selected to do a Beatles cover. Bless them. I hope they're doing great out there still to this day, all these years later. But I'm sorry, folks. No offense, but the cover's horrible. It's a terrible collage drawing showing different eras of the Beatles in cartoonish form. Like they're arriving at a movie theater for a big movie premiere. Then they have all the different Beatles film titles up in the marquee. And mine's still in the shrink. I gotta tell you, I think I've played this thing like you can count on one hand maybe. So it's in like mint, pristine condition. I'm sure it's not worth a bag of peanuts, but it's got the shrink, it's got the hype sticker. And when you open it up inside, you did get this little souvenir program, which was fairly nice, I thought. I mean, not too many later Beatles albums did you get a little booklet with it. But this one, Real Music, did come with this booklet. And it just goes through each film, showing some clips of the actual film itself and filming the film. Help, Hard Day's Night, Help, Magical Mystery Tour, Yellow Submarine, and finally, Let It Be, which, when are they going to release that thing on DVD and Blu-ray, huh? But anyway, that's another video for another day. Then in the back, they show some of the marquees, posters for the film. Then the actual sleeve itself is made to look like film on one side with some Beatles pictures. And on the other side, you get the Beatles collection up to that point. I might have these out of order, by the way, folks. I don't see Beatles 20 Greatest Hits on there, so I'm assuming this came out and then 20 Greatest Hits. But they were both in 82 at some point. But there you go, folks. Just what I'm talking about for this video. That's what we as Americans knew of the Beatles and their releases up until the 80s, which I'm going to talk about next, the later 80s. This was it. This was the gold standard. These were the Beatles releases, including the 20 Greatest Hits right after this. There they are. Okay, that's what we knew. That's what we knew and loved and cherished. Now, so I think things are kind of bleak now. Now we're in 1982, going into the middle part of the 80s, and to me, things were bleak. I mean, the 20 Greatest Hits was not the greatest release. I mean, look at what we've had recently, you know, with the Beatles Sgt Pepper Super Deluxe Box and the remixing by Giles Martin, and we had a whole new remixing of Hollywood Bowl and the new Ron Howard film. And my goodness, a couple of years ago when the Beatles 1 video and Blu-ray, video, DVD, and Blu-ray came out with almost like 50 pristine, remastered, recut videos, beautiful videos of the Beatles all the way from Love Me Do up to, you know, right to the end, and live stuff. What exciting releases we've had in the last 10 years or so. And going back to the '09 remasters, when everything was remastered and re-released again in box form and vinyl form, we've had a lot of exciting things happen. So, you know, from the late '70s up until the mid '80s, it was kind of, you know, and those of you I hope that were around and can attest to this with me, it was kind of bleak as far as Beatles releases. You know, a couple of highlights here and there, but it was kind of like cheesy, I felt, and I think the peak of that cheesiness was in 1982 with that Real Music album that I just showed you. So all of a sudden, the late 80s come into play. And in early 1987, we got the announcement that finally, I don't know how long CDs had been out prior to that, but finally in early 1987, Apple or the Beatles, whatever you want to call it, were going to finally release the first 4 Beatles albums on CD. They're going to be released on February 26th, 1987 to be exact, and they were going to release Please Please Me, With the Beatles, A Hard Day's Night, and Beatles for Sale. It was all going to be in mono, which, if you go back to the time, a lot of audiophiles and people were a little PO'd about the way it was being done. They felt with the CD format and so much more material you could fit on that they should have been a little more generous with releasing both mono and stereo versions on those original CDs, but they did not, and so there was some griping about that, and that will be more for another day. I don't want to spend too much time on the politics of that, but I just want to say is, in 1987, when they were released, the first 4, okay, I'm showing you something different here, which I'll talk about in a minute, but when they first came out, as I opened the bread box here, this is what we got. And I'm going to put this down for a sec to pull out the first 4. But here they are, in all their glory. The original Beatles CDs released in 1987, early 1987, the first 4, February 26th. Okay, Please Please Me, With the Beatles, all in mono, Hard Day's Night, and Beatles for Sale. Now, they were very plainish, as you can see. They did not put a lot of effort into packaging. Basic cover, you know, basic plain CD inside with maybe one picture from the original album. And you might have got a couple of pictures inside like this with a little bit of history on it, not much, with the song titles and another picture. That was about it. They didn't put a lot of effort into the packaging. It wasn't that comprehensive, okay? But the thing with these were, folks, is that, as I said in the beginning of the video, and what I have in my little, my title or whatever, however I end up doing it, is this was a seismic shift in our listening here in the United States. You saw from what I showed you how we were listening to the Beatles, from Meet the Beatles all the way through Something New and Beatles 65 and Beatles 6. That was the gold standard. That's all we had from 1964 till 1987, unless we wanted to spend extra money on an import, and they weren't that available, and they were a little more expensive, and the average schmo could not just, you know, get them or even would seek them out. Our gold standard were the original American releases. Well, when these came out on that February in 1987, this changed the way we listen to the Beatles forever here in America. When these first 4 came out, it was a huge, big deal. The CD format was brand new in 1986, 87 or so, maybe 85. I'm not sure when it came out. But the Beatles were one of the later artists or bands to put their stuff out on CD on that new format. And when they did, it was a big deal. Just like you see now with the release of Sgt Pepper being a big deal, the remixing, or in '09 when the remasters of these albums came out, this was a big deal in 1987. And even though people weren't happy that they were all in mono, these first four, it still was a big deal. I just remember they came in the long boxes, if you remember those, the cardboard long boxes, and it was a huge, huge big deal when they came out. Okay. 2 months later, the next three were released in stereo. We were able to get, I think it was April of 1987, end of April, April 30th, 1987, Help, Rubber Soul, and Revolver were all released on CD in stereo. Again, plainish covers. Again, I won't show you all the insides. They're very plain. There's not a lot to them, folks. All right, these are the original CDs from almost 30 years ago. Well, these were 30 years ago, 87. And Revolver. And again, here we're getting it with the three additional John Lennon songs. I'm Only Sleeping, Dr. Robert, and, oh boy, I'm Only Sleeping, Dr. Robert, and Your Bird Can Sing. Boy, when you get to be my age, folks, you know, some of the memory starts to go a little bit. But anyway, now these were going to be the gold standard from 1987 up to today. Here we are in 2017, 30 years later. And we went from, as a young boy, those original American releases, to now, all of a sudden, in 1987, the world would now see these as the new gold standard in Beatles releases. The big release was on June 2nd, 1987, when Sgt Pepper was given the grand treatment of its own solo release, June 2nd, 1987, and it was a big deal because it was, can you believe it now, the 20th anniversary. It was 20 years ago today, and it was a big deal, folks. When this came out solo by itself on June 2nd of 87, it was huge. And those of you who were around 30 years ago can attest to that with me. This was a big deal because the packaging was a little more elaborate for the Sgt Pepper one. Oh, it was a big deal because the CD, instead of being printed in plain black like the others, was a nice bright red printing on it. And we were, ooh, that's so cool. But the big thing was, it was all the others only had 2 or 3 pages, 4 pages tops in their books. Sgt Pepper came in a nice thick book where they really put some effort into it. Some of the things in here you can almost see now in the remix releases. They went into more detail about who was on the cover of Sgt Pepper, the chart, essays written by different people. George Martin wrote an essay. So many people, I think, Peter Blake, who helped with the cover, wrote an essay. It was amazing. Pictures, outtake pictures from the cover photo session. The inner gatefold in color. Pictures of the Beatles from the back cover with the lyrics. And then this was cool because I had never seen some of these until, at the time, 30 years ago, alternate shots of the Beatles in their Sgt Pepper uniforms. That was a big deal. Okay. Nice alternate shots in the colors, how they, different array of colors in the booklet. This was a big deal, folks. When we got this back in 1987, many of us were very, very excited about it and thought it was such a big deal that this was being released on CD. And we, at the time, we thought such an elaborate packaging, you know, with these pictures and extra essays and back then, and showing what the art design that the Fool did of the original inner sleeve, and that's it. But this was a big deal because it was the 20th anniversary. It was getting its own solo release that June, and the booklet was very thick, and they actually put some effort into the booklet. Then as time went by, the others were released eventually, leading up to the Past Masters set coming out in almost a year later, or a little over a year later, in March of '88. Past Masters 1 and 2 came out on CD in March of '88. But in the interim, we got releases like the White Album, which came in a big double CD package like that. We got the Yellow Submarine CD. Back to the kind of plainish Plainish design again, folks. Magical Mystery Tour, which didn't come with the book or anything. Very plainish, only a few pages. But at the time, folks, you have to remember, you know, being used to having vinyl or cassettes or 8 tracks most of our lives, to finally, in the 80s, this new medium, compact disc, digital music was just starting. And it was such a big deal for us to finally get the Beatles on CD like this. Abbey Road. Again, another plainish one, but didn't put too much effort. Can't stress to you how this was a big deal to get these. And I'm so happy I still have my originals. Past Masters Volume 1, like I said, March of 1988 this was released. Very plain, not a lot to it. There might be a few little pictures in the books, but nothing too elaborate. Okay, and Past Masters 2. Now, this box set, now I didn't get the box set. The box set was released complete with all the albums and compact disc inside. It was released November 15th of 1988, all right? Several months after the final Past Masters 1 and 2 came out by themselves. You could buy this. It was very expensive at the time to get this, what they called, it's known as the bread box, the Beatles bread box, but it's officially called the Beatles Box Set. And the Beatles is embossed in gold right here in the lower corner of the cover. It does look like kind of a black bread box. And it's a flip, almost like a flip desk cover, flips up, and there were all your Beatles CDs laid out. Now, and what was a nice feature about this exclusive to the bread box was in a little slot under the CDs was this, a booklet, okay? A little black book with the logo that's on the box and Parlophone label on the back of it. And I won't go through every page with you in the interest of time, but basically, care of your Beatles box. How to care for the box, the Beatles, contents. Okay, it's a little more involved with this box. Please Please Me. It goes through each album and then tells you a little dissertation about each song on the album. You know, like maybe they'll give you some basic information like, one of the all-time great rock and roll music performances. This is John Lennon tearing through a live blah 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 twist and shout. So it gives you a little description of each song with the Beatles, Beatles for Sale. Again, I'm just going to show you Help, Rubber Soul, Revolver, Sgt Pepper, going through each song. Then somewhere in the book they'll pop in a couple of pictures. Magical Mystery Tour, the White Album, little color picture of the Beatles in the middle. Yellow Submarine, Abbey Road, some more cool color pictures of the Beatles spread in the book. More pictures. Okay. Some more nice color pictures. Hope you can see those okay. Alrighty. Let It Be, the final album. Mad Day Out picture. Okay. Some more pictures. Talking about Let It Be. Goes into Past Masters Volume 1 with an explanation of each song. Past Masters Volume 2, explanation of each song. The recording chronology is listed. They finish up with that and you go A to Z song index. Okay, goes through all the different songs in the catalog, and then it has some picture credits at the end, and then that's the end of the book. So, kind of a cool little thing to have, which I believe you could only get if you ordered this special box set called the Beatles Box back in 1988. So, again, folks, big seismic shift the way we listen to the Beatles after this came out, or, you know, the contents of this, all these CDs. This was a big deal. 30 years ago, total different way for us Americans to listen to the Beatles. And we've never been the same since. And to this day, if you're an original fan, a first generation fan like me, you still kind of have your heart set on those original United States album releases. To this day, I still lean that way. I still love those albums. They still bring me back to my youth and a lot of precious memories from when I was young and when I was a teenager, and that will never go away. These releases, albeit they're great, we love them, they're the gold standard now. They've been re-released in 2009, in a much better format, much better packaging. But they're beautiful, and I love these original releases the way the Beatles wanted them. But for me, the American releases will always have a special place in my heart. So with that, I just want to thank you all for watching. It's glad to do a video for you today. The Beatles in the 80s. We started out kind of in the dregs a little bit, but by the end of the decade, the gold standard would finally be released, and it would be with us forever. And here we are 30 years later, and it looks like this will be the gold standard of releases forever. So with that, folks, I'm going to let you go. The Beatles in the 80s. Here we are in 2017. Excited about many more releases in future years. Hopefully they'll be just as wonderful as some of the ones we've had recently in the last 10 or 15 years or so. I wish you all the best. I hope you enjoyed this little video. Great to see you all. I want to give a little plug to BMX Seeker, I believe it is. BMX, so Bravo Mike X-Ray Seeker. BMX Seeker. When you get a chance, check him out. He's a nice guy and just started making some videos. He asked me to give him a plug, so I'm doing it for him. So BMX Seeker, that's for you, buddy. And the rest of you, as you know, I thank you so much for what you've done and for supporting me. God bless you all. I look forward to my next video with you. I'll see you real soon. Take care. Bye-bye.